The final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 5609 in the name of Kezia Dugdale on 1 billion rising. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. And I would invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. And I would invite Kezia Dugdale to open the debate. 7 minutes, please, Ms Dugdale.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I start by thanking members across the Chamber for signing the motion so it could be heard in Parliament tonight. It's actually my first members' debate, as I was unable to make the last one in my own name. So can I thank those members who have stayed in for the debate, and indeed to all those organisations who have provided briefings for tonight, most notably Zero Tolerance, Leonard Cheshire, Hollerback and SCIAF. The 1 billion Rising campaign, which our motion is named after, was set up in response to the 2008 United Nations report Unite to End Violence Against Women campaign, the key finding of which was that 1 in 3 women worldwide will be raped or beaten in their lifetime. 1 in 3. That's 1 billion women around the world with direct experience of violence. The campaign's call is simply to turn those 1 billion victims into 1 billion activists calling for change. I want to specifically focus my contribution tonight on how community organising and empowering women to take action is the key to successfully changing our culture and our society's attitude towards women. I'll do that by talking to 3 different campaigns that have done this in their own separate ways. But before turning to Hollerback, Everyday Sexism and the No More Page 3 campaign, I'd like to take a moment to recognise the dedication of people across Scotland and indeed around the world who took decisive action on the 14th of February this year. That day, the 1 billion Rising campaign asked women around the world to organise dance strikes to raise awareness of their campaign. There was a dance strike here outside the Scottish Parliament and another in Waverley Station. The reason that so few people know about this day of action is because the 14th of February was also the day the world learned that Oscar Pistorius' girlfriend had been shot and killed, a story which monopolised our airwaves. The next day, the Sun's coverage of that killing shocked the country. It pictured Oscar's nameless girlfriend in a bikini. That front page led to the hashtag Her Name Was Riva Steenkamp trending worldwide, and thousands of column inches devoted to the media's portrayal of women, and in particular victims of gendered violence. For me, it only served to reinforce my long-held belief that you can't seek to tackle gender-based violence without tackling gender inequality in all its forms, no matter how small, how endemic or how difficult it is. Perhaps one of the most difficult challenges is to persuade some tabloid newspapers to give up their obsession with page 3 models in so-called family newspapers. The No More Page 3 petition campaign has 96,000 signatures currently and recently secured the support of the 500,000-strong UK Girl Guiding movement. For as long as women are promoted as sex objects in our mainstream media, gender equality will be forever distant. Topless models in newspapers is perhaps one of the better-known crusades of the feminist movement. But there is a new crusade celebrating its first anniversary this week, called the Everyday Sexism Project. A campaign led by the formidable Laura Bates, who, like Caitlin Moran and Lucy Holmes, speaks with an authenticity, a coolness that cuts through and speaks to young women who might not recognise the word feminist in their own identity, or indeed see gender inequality in their lives in the blunt and unforgiving way their mums or their grannies did. If you look at the Everyday Sexism website, or indeed the Twitter account, you'll see a catalogue, an anthology of women's daily experiences of everyday sexism, from gender stereotyping in the workplace to a so-called harmless bum pinch in a nightclub. It paints a very ugly picture of our culture and the casual sexism we let slip by day. All this casual, everyday sexism leads to the normalisation and acceptance of gender inequality, which eventually leads to violence. So what can we do as men and women who all strive for a more equal world? Well, the answer is to fight back, to come together as a community, whether in the real world, online, and say no. I became involved in the Everyday Sexism Project before Christmas in response to a tweet I'd seen from a friend lambasting Amazon for their Christmas gift list. Amazon had suggested lists of books for Christmas presents, and under men it read science fiction, political biographies, business books. Under women it promoted animal calendars, cookery books and romance novels. My friend tweeted, "Thanks Amazon for letting me know business, politics and sci-fi aren't for my pretty little head." And it was retweeted over 1,000 times in 24 hours. This ultimately led to Amazon withdrawing their gift list and changing their ways. I seek to tell that story, Presiding Officer, to say that when we unite together and challenge everyday sexism, we can change our society and make for a more equal world. If we believe in inequality, we owe it to each other to challenge gender inequality in all its forms, wherever we see it. And in saying that, can I congratulate Hollerback in Edinburgh for their work in empowering women to holler back whenever they are subjected to street harassment across Edinburgh. Finally, Presiding Officer, can I once again thank members for the opportunity to bring these issues to the Chamber. I very much look forward to the contributions from colleagues across Parliament, and I move the amendment in my name.
Many thanks. I now call on Linda Fabiani to be followed by Malcolm Chisholm. 4 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and thank you very much, Kezia Dugdale, for putting forward this motion that we're discussing tonight. And can I say, as someone who has long cared about and campaigned about gender violence, I learned a couple of things tonight. I sometimes think I'm getting really dopey as I get older, because it never dawned on me what Hollerback actually meant. And I thought it was perhaps somebody's name. But I think that's an absolutely super initiative. And it's one which has references back even to the early, or what we call the early feminist movement. There was a lot of feminists around before the 1960s. It just wasn't called that. When there was a campaign, I think it started in the New York subways, which was when you got that harassment that Kezia Dugdale was talking about, was to shout out about it and put the perpetrator on the spot for embarrassment. And sadly, we've lost an awful lot of these initiatives. I don't know. There was a movement all of a sudden that said that feminism wasn't something to be proud of and that you had to keep it quiet. And girl power suddenly became the thing. But to me, the whole girl power thing was just the kind of stuff that promoted the page 3 photographs that we're trying to get rid of now as some kind of female choice, instead of the recognition that actually in our own society and right across the world, there is gender stereotyping and there is abuse from the very mild pornography that I believe page 3 girls are, to the absolute horrendous abuse through all the different stages to the ultimate, which I guess would be rape as a weapon of war, which we're finding all over the place. And the Eve Ensler initiative was interesting. Again, I didn't know much about that. Interesting to read about it. I do like the idea of flash dancing. I must admit, sounds pretty good. Again, I missed that. There's something far wrong. I missed that. But let's hope that if we do that again, Kezia will have us all out there dancing, women and men, in support of ending this kind of violence towards women. I've been reading quite a lot lately about the atrocities that went on in both Sierra Leone and Liberia. And in these places, women were particularly terribly sexually harassed, battered, and all sorts. That lack of respect, it was a power issue. That thing about using women as sex objects is actually about power and the ability for men to feel that they have that kind of power. I saw it myself when I did some work in East Timor at one point. And again, that was women being treated in another terrible form, which was sterilisation by the occupiers of the country, the Indonesians, a way of stopping women from reproducing because they were trying to transmigrate Indonesians into East Timor. It went on in Peru as well. Women activists were, again, when I was there one time, when it was under the dictatorship of Fujimori, it was something that was done both by the Shining Path and by the government side, was the abuse of women activists who were deemed to be getting a bit too lippy, a bit too mouthy. And we've all, I think, in this Parliament, listened to testimony from people. I remember one from Rwanda in particular, and I think Sarah Boyack was there as well, when we listened to the story of a young woman who had hidden in her village and watched all her female relatives being raped. Unfortunately, it's spread right across the world. I mean, even in Eastern Europe, we heard stories of those who were supposed to stop that kind of thing happening. Those worked for the UN, things trafficking women and using women as sex objects. So it's an ongoing campaign. I think anything we can do to raise awareness of it, the likes of 1 billion rising, and the flash dancing is good. And let's all work towards the day when every woman in the world will feel able to dance like no one's looking. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Now Colin Malcolm Chisholm, to be followed by Jamie McGregor.
Presiding Officer, I congratulate Kezia Dugdale on bringing the motion to the Chamber. In doing so, she has brought to light the work of this incredible campaign, which we all applaud today. This campaign has been successful and visible because it has used art and performance to demonstrate the level of support felt by women and hopefully an increasing number of men across the world for the drive to eradicate sexual violence and domestic abuse against women and girls. Through an incredible series of events, the V-Day campaign's most ambitious project, 1 Billion Rising, sought to engage participants in 197 countries and territories in a global day of action marking the 15th anniversary of the organisation. 1 billion women in the world will be impacted in their lives by male violence. V-Day asked that on the 14th of February this year, and indeed throughout the year, we work to help turn the eyes of the world to this gross subjugation of human dignity and equality. On the 14th of September, they succeeded. The campaign brought together diverse groups by creating a body of campaign material and providing a starting point for sustained awareness raising. We should not be able to ignore gender-based violence because it is an uncomfortable truth. We should challenge it because it is a universal injustice. Eve Ensler, who set up the campaign, first came to the fore as a groundbreaking stage producer and writer, and is most famous for her work, The Vagina Monologues. A passionate women's rights campaigner, she saw that art has the power to reach, transform and motivate individuals to act with a shared purpose. Performance can bring issues that affect us all onto a global stage and highlight the hidden, ugly aspects of humanity that may previously have been unseen. And when it comes to violence against women, it must no longer be unseen and unchallenged. For as long as fear and aggression is used as a means to control women and is excused and perpetrated on a global scale, we cannot achieve equality between women and men. And as all the great campaigns and organisations that we know so well in Scotland have been telling us for many years, equally we cannot achieve the end of violence against women without also challenging the wider inequalities within society. And of course, Kezia Dugdale, in her speech, highlighted that dimension, the inequalities, the structural inequalities in society, but also the gender stereotyping, which is such a crucial part of that. And I certainly endorse what Kezia Dugdale said in applauding the Everyday Sexism project, the campaign against Page 3 and the recently formed Hollaback, well, recently in Edinburgh anyway, although of course active elsewhere before that. Now, many of the great Scottish organisations and campaigns have been mentioned by many people, including myself, in the debates that we had in the Chamber in December and in January. And in my last minute, I just want to mention one of those organisations, the Edinburgh Women's Rape and Sexual Abuse Centre, because in those debates, I think in the January one, I highlighted the very serious funding crisis faced by this organisation. It has made some progress over the last 3 months or so, but it still requires to raise £70,000 by the end of May, or else its services will be put under severe strain. Now, I hasten to add it's not the Scottish Government that withdrew its funding. It was a big lottery grant that ended. But the fact of the matter is that if that money is not raised, and they do have some applications in the pipeline, but if they don't, this vitally organisation will need to restructure its services to prioritise frontline support and counselling posts. But this will mean a 50% cut in frontline services and redundancies of skilled and specialist counsellors and support workers. They already have a 9-month waiting list, and referrals are increasing, so a 50% cut to frontline services would significantly reduce the capacity of the organisation to meet the tragically increasing need, because it's very sad to have to end on this note. We've emphasised the campaigning, we've emphasised the awareness-raising campaigns, but until we have made progress, we desperately need the services, and this is one of many organisations that is desperately needed and that still requires to fill the funding gap.
Many thanks. Now call on Jamie McGregor to be followed by Ian Gray.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I congratulate Kezia Dugdale on securing today's debate and commend her motion, which all members of this Parliament can support, I hope. I also commend the 1 billion Rising campaign, which has done good work to raise awareness of the appalling scale of violence against women globally. We heard from Kezia Dugdale about the extent of the rape and abuse of women across our world, which is truly shocking. It is impressive that the 1 billion Rising campaign has reached 207 countries, where people have come together to try to protest about the suffering of women, and I am pleased that the 1 billion Rising website emphasises that it wants men as well as women to become involved in the campaign, stating violence against women and girls is not only a women's issue, it's a human issue. When we say everyone should join the campaign, we mean everyone. I'm encouraged by the actions of the UK Government too, in terms of supporting women abroad. The Foreign Office, through its Preventing Sexual Violence initiative, is pushing for greater international action and helping countries improve their efforts to tackle these crimes and support survivors. There is now a team of experts working on evidence gathering, investigations, prosecutions and the proper care of victims and witnesses in conflict situations. In 2011, the Department for International Development also published a strategic vision of how the UK's international aid could best be used to have a transformative impact on the lives of women and girls around the world. And the Minister of State, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Mr Hugo Swire, in answer to a question from Stella Creasy, the Labour MP for Walthamstow, said this government will stop at nothing in trying to stamp out violence of any sort against women, wherever it takes place. Unfortunately, there is too much violence against women in our own country. The Under-Secretary of State for International Development, Lynn Featherstone, is taking forward an international campaign to end violence against women and will represent the UK at the UN Commission on the Status of Women, which will focus on the elimination and prevention of all forms of violence against women and girls. I would also say to the Honourable Member for Walthamstow, Stella Creasy, that we are using Britain's presidency of the G8 to run a year-long campaign led by the Foreign Secretary on preventing sexual violence in armed conflicts. And many of us also saw recently the extensive coverage of the recent visit by the Foreign Secretary William Hague and Angelina Jolie, the Special Envoy for the UN Human Rights Council, and great actress also, to the Democratic Republic of Congo as part of their battle against the use of rape as a weapon of war. This again was very important in terms of awareness raising. The UK Government subsequently committed an extra £10 million to tackling sexual violence and harm to women in war zones, something which has been widely welcomed. And today's debate is timely and welcome, and I hope all of us in this Parliament and the Scottish Government can unite to send out the message loudly and clearly that violence against women in any form on any part of our planet is completely unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Ian Gray to be followed by Sandra White.
Congratulations to Kezia Dugdale for securing this debate, and also to 1 Billion Rising for the remarkable global mobilisation on the 14th of February. Any event which spans the world from Kelso to Bukavu in the Congo is something very special. I saw the chaotic, violent anarchy of Bukavu almost 20 years ago, and I cannot pretend to be surprised that it has since been called the rape capital of the world. What is surprising, though, is that the 1 Billion movement has reached out to rape survivors there in eastern Congo, opened a support centre and mobilised thousands of women in its cause. But, Deputy Presiding Officer, we should not kid ourselves that violence against women is defined by war, societal breakdown or some kind of foreignness. This shame stalks Scotland too. Only today, STV reports that a Milnathort man was convicted of assaulting his wife because she had overcooked his steak. And that's not an isolated example either. Tomorrow morning, I'll buy my local weekly paper, which will have a whole page of court reports, and I'm willing to bet that most of them will be similar stories of violence against women. They usually are. And of course they are. 2 years ago, Napier University studied attitudes to gendered violence amongst 11 and 12-year-olds in Scotland. Nearly all of these young people, boys and girls, believed that a man was justified in punching his partner because she had had an affair, and 80% of them thought he had cause to slap his partner if his tea was late. We don't need war to justify abuse. A badly cooked steak is reason enough. But that man didn't just throw his wife out of the house. He included his daughters too, presumably to teach them that all women are collectively guilty, no matter whose hand was on the frying pan. And his lawyer explained that consideration should be given to the fact that he had now recognised that he has a difficulty with alcohol. But it isn't alcohol that is his problem. It is his attitude to women. Kezia Dugdale is right. This begins with everyday sexism and inequality, and it ends in the normalisation of violent abuse. And that sexism is found in the most erudite of circles. Last year, the astrophysicist Professor Jocelyn Bell visited this Parliament and described the intimidation she was subjected to as the only woman in her undergraduate physics class at Glasgow University. She stuck it out and went on to discover pulsars, and then her male supervisor was awarded the Nobel Prize on the back of her work. And she's not the only one either. Rosalind Franklin helped discover DNA, but it was Crick, Watson and Wilkins who got the prize. Professor Bell was here launching a report, this one, which shows that in Scotland 73% of women who study science never find work in science at all. Perhaps they just get the message that they are not wanted. Like Sally in that Napier study, who says, at the moment, I want to be a dancer or a doctor, but when I grow up, I'll be going to have 2 babies and work part-time in the shop down the road. Now, that is a waste of potential and ambition, but it is something much darker too. Because remember, this is the same Sally who thinks that in adult life her partner will be entitled to hit her if she's late with her tea. Violence against women isn't caused by war or drink or ignorance. It is caused by the attitudes of men. And 1 billion rising is telling us that the game is up.
Thanks very much. I now call on Sandra White to be followed by Alison Johnson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and congratulations to Kezia Dugdale, not just on our first members' debate, but on such a subject which obviously is emotive, but is something that every one of us here and out with this chamber have an interest and should have an interest in. My recollections when Linda Fabiani was speaking about East Timor and Ian Gray had spoken about the Congo. I remember the late, great Margaret, not Margaret Thatcher, by the way, Margaret Ewing, MSP, who did an awful lot of work, violence against women. And I remember a speech that she gave when she came back from, I believe it was the Congo also, where she had said that she had spoken to women who had been raped in every orifice. And that has never left me. Just her saying that, the shock and the horror of that. And here still, again, we have rape being used as a weapon of war, and the atrocities that's been committed against not just women, but young children as well, used as a weapon of war. And I would certainly say that it should be, basically a sentence for anyone who uses that as a weapon of war. And I think it's important we do keep our eye on the international side of things, because whilst we here in the Scottish Parliament, yes, we are tackling certain issues of violence against women, and I looked at the COSLA paper, Safer Lives, Changing Lives, which puts down here all the different things that we in the Scottish Parliament have done to try and help women against violence against women and domestic abuse, things such as the Domestic Abuse Task Force, domestic abuse courts and legislation which we're looking at just now, basically considering Victim and Witnesses Bill, and obviously the issue of corroboration, particularly in sexual offences, which have still to come. These are things that, yes, we should be proud of, but there's lots of things we can do also. And one of the areas where I'm very interested, and I know everyone else is here as well, is the sexual exploitation of women. And certainly when you talk about certain newspapers, I've never appeared on page 3, but I've certainly been slated in many of these newspapers because of not just my stance, but others against sexual exploitation in the many forms that it actually takes. We've heard about the educational opportunities, basically for young kids as well, for girls in particular, and their expectations that, yeah, they should possibly, if they say no to a young boy when they're a teenager, then they deserve a slap in the face, and that was a horrific report that we heard there also. So sexual exploitation of many avenues, but when you actually even look at some of the music that's put out, the words that's put out for young girls, you see young girls as young as 3, 4, 5, toddlers, basically gyrating about a stage where, people think that that's fine, that they're in one of these dance classes and it's absolutely fine. But when you actually look at that, that's sexual exploitation as well for kids as young as 3, 4 and 5. When you look at some of the clothes, which I won't name the stores that have sold them, with terrible slogans across the front. I saw one not that long ago which says, "I am a mini wag," which was a tiny wee T-shirt, and it was only a wee kiddie, a 5-year-old that was wearing it. We've had bras and pants for young kids as long as 4 and 5 being sold, in shops. That's sexual exploitation. And what do you do about that? You've got to basically educate in regarding that. And I know many in this chamber have done that also. I mean, I put forward my adult entertainment bill, the lap dancing, legislation. Unfortunately, it didn't get passed the last time because certain parties voted it down. I would appeal that they would support it this time when the bill comes forward once again, which I'm putting forward. We have got to make sure that sex exploitation of young girls and horrific crimes, which I think reach from that because women are looked upon as objects, sexual objects, and not human beings. We've got to do everything in our power in this Parliament and throughout the world to ensure that women are treated as equal human beings to everyone else on this planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now call on Alison Johnson to be followed by Jenny Mara.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to thank Kezia Dugdale for bringing this important debate to the Chamber. Few people would expect that more women die or are disabled as a result of violence or rape than from malaria, traffic accidents, cancer and AIDS combined, yet this is a fact. Scottish Women's Aid and Zero Tolerance have worked long and hard to raise awareness of and tackle this blight on society. And 1 Billion Rising aims to raise awareness of the fact that 1 in 3 women in the world face violence in their lifetime. Here in Scotland, Engender tell us that the number of reported cases of domestic violence is on the increase, with 1 in 5 women projected to be affected by domestic violence here in her lifetime. Yet, as Malcolm Chisholm has stated, rape crises face an ongoing struggle for sustainable funding. Violence against women doesn't take place in a vacuum. It takes place in a context where women are paid less than men, even when they're doing similar work, and where gender segregation begins at birth, from toys to clothing. Austerity itself is gendered. Women are quite simply poorer and consequently have fewer choices. And to what extent do they make the choices that affect them? There are too few women in politics. Women are very visible in campaigns to protect schools, hospitals, nurseries, but too few women are involved in making the decisions, the choices in our local authorities, at Westminster and here in Holyrood. And how are women represented in the media? They are underrepresented on many of the most frequently aired panel shows. If you watch QI, never mind the Buzzcocks, Mock the Week, A Question of Sport, 8 out of 10 Cats, you'll be aware that gender balance is a rarity. But why is this important? Well, it's important because print and broadcast media have a massive impact on how society views women. Women disappear from the cinema screen when they reach a certain age. And we've even been made aware of cases where they're deemed too old to read the news. And sports media has an overwhelming male focus, yet that is seldom questioned. And international research has shown that When reporting on women in sport, sporting media is focused on winners only, record holders and those with unique achievements. But if this criteria was applied to male sport, the back pages would shrink rapidly. Women are described as sex symbols, wives, mothers and victims. And it would seem logical that once a structural inequity has been discovered, action might be taken to address it. But there is little evidence to suggest that this is the case. Outside major global games, women are largely invisible in our sporting press. It's a rarity and astonishing in the 21st century that women are rarely pictured in the sports pages. And when did you last see women's sport televised outside of Wimbledon or these major global games? And what of the impact of fashion? The ex-editor of Vogue recently reported cases of models eating tissues to stave off hunger pangs to meet the whims of designers whose ideal woman is very tall, very thin and very young. And this filters down from the catwalk to permeate our culture and results in a culture of dissatisfaction, criticism and objectification. And that's why it's so important to show that there is an alternative. Let's celebrate normal women's bodies. Let's celebrate fit, healthy bodies. Women are too often made to feel wrong, even when we know that they are very fine indeed. In Parliament and out with, let's look at what day-to-day action we can take to help bring about the systemic change that is needed. And thanks to brave men and brave women the world over, violence against women is receiving more attention. Rape as a weapon of war, as an everyday occurrence, is being challenged. And we need to make sure this awareness translates into action. Violence against women takes place in a context where a woman's appearance is deemed more important than her endeavours and her achievements, where our diverse and complex lives are reduced to caricature and where women are objectified. Let's do all that we can to ensure that women and girls have the freedom to exercise agency and autonomy over their own bodies and lives. Let's support and empower and resource all women and girls to know and to claim their rights, and to ensure that no one is in any doubt that violence against women and girls is an unacceptable, despicable crime. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now call on Jenny Mara, after which we'll move to the Minister for the closing speech.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I thank my colleague, Kezia Dugdale, for bringing this debate to Parliament tonight. Her commitment to equality is evident in her work in this building and in her community every day. And it is with such powerful advocates, Presiding Officer, that we continue to march forward. I would like to speak tonight about a group of girls and women who cannot rise, who cannot march forward because abuse to their human rights is hidden. It's hidden to such an extent that there has not been one police report, not one prosecution, and not one conviction of this human rights abuse in Scotland to date. It is also one of the worst abuses of human rights that I have heard of. Many of them do not know that what is happening to them is illegal, a fundamental breach of their human rights, or indeed torture. And I'm talking about girls in Scotland who have their genitals cut out, their clitoris dug out and removed by a scalpel, sewn up, left to bear the indescribable pain and long-term health consequences. Death can be caused by haemorrhage or infections, cysts, abscesses, chronic pelvic infections, repeated urinary tract infections, increased complications during childbirth, traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, psychosexual problems. The pain...
Ms Mara, if you want to stop until we get the noise stopped from the contractors, do so, and I'll allow you to continue thereafter. If you want to continue, please do.
Would you prefer that I stop, Presiding Officer?
No, I would prefer if you continue, but it's entirely up to you.
I'll continue.
Right.
The searing and inscrutable pain that some school-aged girls in this country suffer. But young girls and women, mainly in our refugee communities in Scotland, experience this. They experience it on Scottish soil and are sent to other countries where their families are from to have the procedure or physical violation done to them. I am loath, Presiding Officer, to sanitise and normalise this torturous physical abuse by calling it a procedure. and women who have been through this themselves still consent to have the same done to their daughters. There is an estimate today that 3,000 women in Scotland have had this done to them. Why? Because many women coming to Scotland as refugees have received no education and are not in a position to know that female genital mutilation is not normal procedure. They are told in their communities that it is culturally, religiously and socially acceptable and necessary. It is to make them more female, more marriageable, prevent them from promiscuity. Their daughters will fare better if they undergo this torturous human rights abuse and consent is given. Female genital mutilation has been specifically against the law in this country since 1985. In 2005, this Parliament passed an Act extending the crime to those responsible for taking girls and women to another country to perform the torturous act there. We have the full power of law in this country to prevent it, but to date there has not been one police report, not one prosecution and not one conviction in our courts. We know it's happening, and I'd very much appreciate if the Minister in her closing remarks may commit to investigating why. I want to know why our law is not being enforced in this country, and today I rise in indignation for the children that this law is failing, the girls and women undergoing torture and the most grievous of human rights abuses imaginable. And today I pledge to continue to make their voices heard.
Thank you very much. And I would congratulate you on persevering with your speech in the face of what was an obvious distraction. I'd invite perhaps Linda Fabiani, who is a member of the corporate body, to note the level of noise that there was, which is completely unacceptable during debates. And should you, if you wish to respond, Ms Fabiani?
I would like to respond. I don't
hold you personally responsible.
I would like to respond because myself and Dave Stewart and Ian MacArthur actually visited the site today, and we said to your man in charge how disruptive it had been when it had happened before, and he was profusely apologetic. So I think we can certainly go back now with a degree of, what would I call it, annoyance. That this has happened again and put something in place.
This is the second time this has happened today. I now call on the Minister, Shona Robertson, please, 7 minutes to close or thereby. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First of all, congratulations to Kezia Dugdale on securing this very important debate to mark such a significant global campaign. I think it's probably very appropriate. This is her first members' debate, given her long-term interest in gender equality, and thanks to all members who have participated for some very interesting, positive and constructive contributions. I'm very pleased to be able to respond to this debate in a personal capacity, as it is a topic I'm fully committed to, and it's also my pleasure to respond in my capacity as Minister with additional responsibility for equality alongside my responsibilities for sport, Commonwealth Games and obesity. I think this is a result of the growing importance of mainstreaming equality to allow me to work alongside and provide extra support to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing and to progress our work on equality. I should say the Cabinet Secretary will retain responsibility for same-sex marriage legislation and will maintain close contact in relation to all equality issues. So I do look forward to working with all of you and the whole Parliament to progress our work on equality. As has been said by many, violence against women destroys lives, limits freedom and potential, and has no place in 21st century Scotland. Yet, less than 3 weeks ago, a 14-year-old girl was raped by 2 men on a Glasgow bus, and at the weekend a 24-year-old woman was dragged into a lane near Queen's Park in Glasgow by 3 men and was raped. So we have a lot of work to do. There was widespread coverage of these crimes and a general sense of outrage among Scottish society. As a society, we must stop accepting violence against women and girls as a given, and we need to challenge the attitudes towards women which lie behind these horrific crimes. Rape and other sexual offences are among the most distressing and disturbing crimes in our society, and we want to ensure that those who commit such horrific crimes are caught, and also that, in addition to justice, victims receive the support that they need. Indeed, I should say that Scotland's new single police force intend to treat rape as seriously as homicide, using the same levels of expertise for investigations as used in homicide investigations. Specially trained sexual offence liaison officers will support victims throughout the investigation. I should say also that on the wider world stage, for the first time, G8 leaders are conferring on the topic of sexual violence during war, including more efficient prosecution of perpetrators. Resolving sexual violence and conflict is an inseparable part of resolving the conflict in general. And to quote UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, "We must unite. Violence against women cannot be tolerated in any form, in any context, in any circumstance, by any political leader or by any government. There is one universal truth applicable to all countries, cultures and communities. Violence against women is never acceptable, never excusable and never tolerable." And we welcome very much campaigns such as 1 Billion Rising, which raise awareness of violence against women and inspire people from all over the world to take action. The truth is shocking. According to the United Nations, 1 in every 3 women on the planet will be physically or sexually abused in her lifetime. The 14th of February did mark the largest global action in history to end violence against women and girls. Over 1 billion people worldwide were mobilised, women and men, in 207 countries, inspired to come together and express their outrage and to strike, dance and rise against violence. And I was really delighted to hear of the number of events happening all over Scotland. Dance protests, street parades took place the length and breadth of Scotland, from the borders to the Highlands and Islands, communities large and small, including, as Kezia Dugdale pointed out, one right outside this Parliament. I also want to note that tomorrow is National Stalking Awareness Day, and to mark this, a brand new partnership-based campaign was launched in Glasgow yesterday to raise awareness of what stalking is and what to do about it. Because stalking negatively impacts on every part of victims' lives, ranging from harassment, telephone calls, computer communications, letter writing, escalating, of course, in some occasions to physical and sexual violence and even murder. And we want, as a government, to work collaboratively to ensure that Scotland has robust laws to tackle stalking. And, of course, we improve protection for victims through the Criminal Justice and Licensing Scotland Act 2010, which criminalises stalking. We do recognise that there is still much to be done, and in spite of the severe economic constraints, I am pleased that we have been able to maintain our funding for violence against women at £34.5 million. And that's important because projects such as the Mentors in Violence Prevention programme, led by the Violence Reduction Unit, assist the Special Domestic Abuse Advocacy Service that provides advocacy and support to victims of domestic abuse, and the Scottish Borders Pathway Project, a new multi-agency project designed to support victims and children of domestic abuse, all benefit from that funding. I do, of course, recognise, as Malcolm Chisholm pointed out, the particular circumstances in Edinburgh, and of course she did acknowledge that was the end of lottery funding. Of course, we do support the Edinburgh Centre to the tune, I think, of around £100,000, but I do recognise his and Alison Johnson's local concerns about that. I believe that not just this government but this Parliament does provide leadership on tackling and preventing violence against women, but it's not just about us, it's about everyone playing a part, no matter how small. Violence against women cannot be tackled by any one sector alone, and that's why it's vital we work with our partners. And we certainly welcome Police Scotland's commitment to addressing domestic abuse and rape, and the energy and dedication of our public, statutory and voluntary sector partners to reduce and ultimately eradicate these terrible crimes. And on the point of the horrific crime of female genital mutilation that Jenny Mara raised, I think what I'll do is write to her on the specifics around the police reports and convictions in some detail. I also want to pay tribute to the work of the partners in the voluntary sector, Scottish Women's Aid, Rape Crisis Scotland and the Women's Support Project, who have all campaigned and lobbied nationally over many years. We are currently developing Scotland's first violence against women strategy, and prevention and early intervention will be a central feature of our approach. It's essential that men and boys are part of the solution, because it is absolutely not just a women's problem, although women are overwhelmingly the victims. And I have to say it was put very well by Ian Gray, who talked strongly about the need for men to take responsibility and to change their attitudes towards women, because it's those underlying attitudes that underpin some of the sexual violence that I talked about earlier on. And we do continue to support the very successful White Ribbon campaign, which has grown from its roots in Canada to an international education and awareness-raising initiative, engaging men in a positive way to take action and to send a message to other men that violence is not acceptable. Just to close, Deputy Presiding Officer, we are fully committed to tackling all aspects of violence against women, to supporting the continued work involving many in this Parliament, but also across Scotland, particularly in the voluntary sector. Any instance of rape or violence against women is one too many. Progress is being made, but there's a lot still to do, and it's vital we continue to work to raise awareness, to change attitudes through this campaign and other means, to stop violence against women from happening in the first place, and to tackle the gender inequality issues that underpin much of that. And in conclusion, I'd like again to end by commending 1 Billion Rising. I look forward to their continuing presence as a leading campaigning organisation in Scotland, and I look forward to a time when their and our work to tackle violence against women is done. I suspect that's going to be some time, and in the meantime, I look forward to working with people across this chamber to make the progress that's required. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now close this meeting of Parliament.